Quitters don't win. While I was writing the previous devotional, Winners Don't Quit, I realised that it would be better if I split the devotional into two. So you can consider this to be part 2. Anyway, let's do a bit of catch up. We've been looking at how it is God's plan for us to be winners in life. For us to be what Romans 8:37 calls more than conquerors. So let's look at some more examples of people who wouldn't quit. We'll start with one that has its foundation in the Bible, but its fulfillment in modern times. The state of Israel. There are many verses that prophesied Israel's return to the promised land, even before the final exile under the Romans had occurred. When that exile did occur, the Jews held on to verses like Ezekiel 39:27, where God promised he would one day bring them back to their land. When I have brought them back from the peoples and gathered them out of the lands of their enemies. That's the modern English version. God is always faithful to his promises, but many generations of Jews lived and died never seeing the fulfillment of their promised return, because there was an extremely long period of time between the destruction of the temple in AD 70, and subsequently what remained of Israel ceasing to exist, and the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. But those faithful Jews who died prior to 1948 did see the fulfillment of God's promise, because they saw it with the eyes of faith. Year after year, they kept declaring, "Next year in Jerusalem." And when the next year came around, they were no closer to being in Jerusalem or anywhere else in their land than they were before. Yet by faith, they kept on declaring, "Next year in Jerusalem." The Jewish people took seriously the exhortation in Psalm 137 verse 5 to never forget Jerusalem. "If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill." The devil, meanwhile, was determined to make sure that God's promise for them to return to the land never came to pass. Partly because the Jews are God's people, but what was more important to him was to make God a liar. Of course, that will never happen, because it is impossible for God to lie, as Hebrews 6:18 tells us. But the devil, in his pride, always overlooks this vital detail. So in order to make God a liar, the devil made attempt after attempt to destroy the Jewish people, until eventually the darkness of the Holocaust descended, and it looked as if all hope was close to being lost. But it wasn't lost, because the Jewish people refused to quit. They held on tightly to what God had promised, and only a few years after what could have been total disaster in World War II, their breakthrough finally came, and the modern nation of Israel was born. Thousands of years before, Isaiah had written, "Who has heard or seen anything as strange as this? For in one day suddenly a nation, Israel, shall be born." That's Isaiah 66 verse 8 from the Living Bible. And on the 14th of May 1948, Israel was born in one day, just as Isaiah had prophesied. When the temptation to give up is the strongest, that is the time to clamp down hard like a dog with a bone, on whatever it is you're believing for, on whatever it is you are standing in faith for, and refuse to let go. Determine that you will keep persevering as long as it takes. Don't be passive, because that just leads to defeat. Instead, have a dogged determination that refuses to be discouraged or quit. Here's another example of someone who was not a quitter, and who inspired an entire nation and beyond not to be quitters, but to press on until victory was secured. That man was Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. On the 4th of June 1940, Winston Churchill made a now famous speech to Parliament in London. During part of his speech he said, "We shall not flag or fail. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. With these words, Winston Churchill inspired the United Kingdom to keep going and to never surrender. Then, 4 years later, as 300,000 British troops faced almost certain death on the shores of France, King George VI requested that the 26th of May 1940 be a national day of prayer. The result was what became known as the Miracle of Dunkirk. Because of the indomitable determination inspired by Winston Churchill and the prayers of both the nation and its king, the victory was indeed won by the Allies. If you want to live a victorious life, follow the example of Sir Winston Churchill, and determine in your heart that you will never surrender to Satan, who is, after all, a defeated foe. Follow the example of King George VI, and never forget the power of prayer. If you do this, you will get the victory that may have seemed a very long time in coming. Don't be a quitter. Quitters don't win. We hope that you've enjoyed this devotional, and we pray that you will be blessed and that you won't quit.